Hello. Today it is my lucky day because I get to eat them. But we are going to be making gluten-free brownies, and I'm going to be using the King Arthur recipe for gluten-free brownies.
So first our ingredients. We're going to need 1.5 cups of superfine sugar, granulated sugar, 8 tablespoons or 1 whole stick of butter. I'm using unsalted butter, a half a teaspoon salt, 1 teaspoon of gluten-free vanilla, 3/4 of a cup of Dutch processed cocoa powder. I'm using the Guittard brand. It's local here in San Francisco area. 3 large eggs, 3/4 of a cup of gluten-free flour. I'm just using the King Arthur brand because that's what I have at home. 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and I'm going to be using one cup of chocolate chips, and I'm also using the Guittard brand. It's a Guittard kind of day. It's a Guittard kind of day. It is optional if you wanted to use 1 cup of chopped nuts, but I am not going to be using nuts today.
First things first, I want to get my pan ready. So I have an 8 by 8 inch square glass pan. You can use metal. It's just I have a glass one. And I'm going to go ahead and butter the bottom and the sides of this pan. Now, if you are going to be making these brownies and it's just for you and you don't really care if they come out cut perfectly with nice edges, then you can go ahead and just stop there. But I want mine to be able to pop right out of the pan, to be able to cut them into really beautiful squares and have a really nice presentation. So I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper and I just cut a strip that'll fit directly inside my pan, and I'm going to press it against that butter, and that butter is going to help it stick to the side. Now you see I still have 2 edges that aren't covered with parchment paper, and that's fine as long as the bottom and 2 opposite sides are, and you have enough hangover of parchment paper that hangs over so that you'll be able to lift it out when you're all done. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set this aside for now. Okay, so to get going, you can do one of 2 things. You can either do the first part on the stovetop in a pan, or you can actually use your microwave in a microwave safe bowl. I'm just going to use the stovetop, and I'm going to, in a small to medium pan, I'm going to add 1.5 cups of my granulated sugar. I did 3 1/2 cup measuring, and then I'm going to add my 8 tablespoons of unsalted butter, and I could just plop the whole stick in there, but I want the whole thing to melt eventually, so it'll melt a little bit faster if I just kind of give it a couple chops before I stick it in the bowl. So just break it up a little bit. It'll just help that process of melting and mixing go faster. Okay, and then I need 1/2 of a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to go ahead and put this over medium-low heat and let it all melt together. Okay, so it's hard to see this, but I have the butter, the sugar, and the salt in my pan, and I'm just going to gradually stir this while it's over the heat because I don't want that sugar to burn on the bottom of the pan. As soon as that butter starts to really start melting, it should combine nicely. I am using a heat-proof rubber spatula. This is heat-proof up to 500 degrees. If you don't have a heat-proof spatula, then use, I would suggest using maybe a wooden spoon. Be careful if you have only a metal spoon because the heat will transfer all the way up to the handle and it could burn you. But I love my heat-proof rubber spatulas. I use them all the time for everything from sauteing to baking. So they're a nice tool to have at home. So I'm just going to continue to stir this until it starts to melt and combine.
Okay, so as you can see, it has come together, and this process will help to start melting the sugar, and what that will do is it'll help give the brownies a nice shiny crust. So I'm turning the heat off now, and I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step.
I'm going to take my sugar mixture that I just melted, and I'm going to go ahead and pour it into bowl. Make sure I get every last bit. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and add the vanilla, and I wanted 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And I'm going to mix that in gently so I don't splatter. Then I'm going to add my 3/4 of a cup of cocoa powder. Now cocoa powder is very light and airy. It's kind of like powdered sugar, and so you don't want to compact it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure it like I measure flour. I've got my 1/4 cup measuring cup, so I'm going to gently spoon this beautiful cocoa powder in, and then I'm going to level it off. Ooh, this is kind of messy. I need a bigger container, but that's okay. Now, this was a brand new container of cocoa powder, so it hasn't had a chance to sit around and get lumpy. If you do notice that your cocoa powder has some lumps in it, which tends to happen with cocoa powder, you might want to sift it. And that's just to ensure you don't get any big old clumps of cocoa powder. So this is my last one. Right on through. Okay, and then I'm going to gently mix in the cocoa powder. It's kind of hard to mix at this point. It's very thick batter. Okay, now I'm going to mix my eggs in. Now, I like to crack my eggs into a separate container before I add them to my other ingredients, just in case there is an egg that is not a good egg. That's a good one. 1. 2. And 3 good eggs. Okay. And I'm going to combine those eggs with the chocolate batter. Okay, so I have my wet ingredients in my bowl, apart from the cocoa powder. But for this brownie purpose, that will be in the wet ingredients. Now I'm going to add my dry ingredients. So which mixing method are we using if I have wet ingredients and dry ingredients? This would be the muffin mixing method. So I need 3/4 cup of gluten-free flour. And I'm going to measure it the same way I measured that cocoa powder. Gently spoon it in. Make sure it's nice and level. Level it off. I need 3 of these because this is my 1/4 mixing or measuring cup. So 3 of those, and I need 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And since my 1 teaspoon measurement was used for the vanilla, I'm going to use my 1/2 teaspoon, and I'm going to do it twice. That way I don't contaminate my baking powder. By the way, I forgot to mention that my oven has been heating to 350 degrees. Okay, so I've got my dry ingredients. I'm just going to give that a quick little whisk to make sure it's combined. And then I'm going to gently add that to my chocolate mixture and just kind of fold it in. When you're folding, let me turn this up so you can see what folding is. You take your spatula, scoop it on the bottom, and kind of fold it on top of the dry ingredients. And I'm just kind of gently trying to get that nicely incorporated. And once I have this incorporated, I'm going to go ahead and add my chocolate. That is looking pretty good. Okay, so the chocolate chips that I have at my house are these super chunk, huge chocolate chips. And so I want to chop them up a little bit smaller just so that they kind of incorporate really well into my batter and I get a little bit of chocolate in every bite. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a rough chop of these chocolate chips. Okay, and I'm just going to scoop these into my batter. And again, just fold those into my batter. Now, if you are planning on using nuts in your brownies, or really in any baked good, I highly recommend that you toast the nuts first. It brings out the flavor in the nuts, and it will completely change your product in a good way. So you can toast your nuts, just put them on a sheet pan while your oven's heating up. You can toast your nuts just in a low oven. It doesn't take long. As soon as you start smelling the nuts kind of toasting, you know that they're done and they're ready to be taken out. So this batter is ready to go. I'm going to just pour it straight into my pan. Okay, so this is going to head into my oven at 350 degrees for about 33 to 38 minutes, but keep an eye on it.
Okay, so my brownies have been in the oven for 35 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and pull them out now. I can see that crack in the center, and I'm okay with my brownies being a little underdone if they happen to be a little on the gooey side. So I'm going to let them cool for about 5 minutes in this pan before I gently lift them up and onto a wired cooling rack.
Okay, so here's the cool thing about the parchment paper. I'm just going to run a knife along the sides that didn't have the parchment paper to make sure that nothing is sticking. And then all I have to do is gently lift and place it on my cooling rack. And I'm going to let this cool completely before I slice into it so that I get nice, clean, even cuts. So the brownies have cooled, and now I'm going to use my chef knife and I'm going to cut them into 6 equal portions. If you find that you're getting a bunch of gooey, yummy brownie stuff on here, you can get a wet towel, a warm wet towel, and clean it off in between slices if you're really concerned about your slices coming out perfect and beautiful. But if you're not concerned about it, then it doesn't matter. So the corners are my favorite because I love the chewy outer edge. And you can see how gooey and chocolatey those are on the inside. You would never know that they're gluten-free.